Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today for Security, Reliability, and Data Protection in Google Apps. My name is Adam Swidler. I'm a Senior Manager here at Google, and I'm joined today by Janine Roeth, who is the CIO of the University of California at Santa Cruz. Hi Janine.
Hi Adam, glad to be here.
Today we're going to cover a very quick overview of Google Apps, and then Janine is really going to go into depth on how UCSC evaluated Google Apps from a security and compliance and privacy standpoint, and eventually made their decision to move to Google Apps for Education. And then I'll come back on the line and kind of do a deeper dive into how we protect the data that's stored in Google Apps. So first, just a quick overview of what Google Apps is. Google's really coming to the market with a new approach centered around cloud computing, and what we mean by that are applications that are hosted on our servers that are accessed by users using modern web browsers, heavily leveraging advanced technologies such as HTML5, but allowing users to access these applications from a wide variety of devices such as laptops, notebooks, tablet devices, and of course mobile devices, and getting that very, very similar and consistent user experience across any of these different devices. Additionally, we really leverage the internet and the power of the cloud to provide highly collaborative applications so that multiple users can edit documents all at the same time. Multiple users can be working on a spreadsheet together and see each other's changes in real time, and of course email and instant message collaboration as well. A very high-level look at the suite that is known as Google Apps includes Gmail, but a version of it that's specific for your business. So it's got a huge inbox, 25 gigabytes on the Google Apps for Business and Google Apps for Education editions. Really allows you to keep and find everything very effectively inside your inbox. Google Talk, which is our instant message capability. Google Groups, which allow you to define groups of people to apply sharing permissions and interactions with. Google Calendar, which is a fantastic collaborative tool for scheduling both people and resources in your environment. Google Docs, which includes spreadsheets, presentations, and text documents that, again, as I mentioned before, are developed in a highly collaborative environment, allowing multiple users to be able to work on the documents all in parallel and see each other's edits in real time. Google Cloud Connect is a component of the suite that allows you to integrate Microsoft Office documents inside our cloud architecture and actually enable simultaneous co-authoring of those documents using the Microsoft Office clients, but leveraging the Google Apps Cloud as a backend to facilitate those collaborative engagements. Google Sites is a product that lets you develop websites without having to know any HTML or other technical code. Google Video allows you to share and stream video throughout your enterprise. And finally, Google Postinio gives you additional security and compliance solutions that work together with Google Apps to meet your compliance needs. Now, Google Apps for Business adds a couple of specific things that are worth calling out on top of that, and this is also applicable to Google Apps for Education, which is the version that UC Santa Cruz has deployed, and obviously the one that many of our higher education and K-12 institutions have chosen. And some of those things include things like integrating with your existing enterprise infrastructure, and in particular things like Active Directory or your LDAP-based identity management framework. We have a very clean way to integrate with that and take advantage of the investment that you may have made in those technologies already in your existing infrastructure. Being able to integrate with Exchange for doing things like free and busy calendar lookups. That capability is available in Google Apps for Business and Google Apps for Education. On the client side, we support people that want to use Microsoft Outlook as a front end to Gmail and Google Apps. We support things like BlackBerry, and we have foundational elements like Active Sync that allow us to integrate with other types of clients as well. But of course, for a very rich, highly integrated experience, the Android platform is a great opportunity for mobile access to our applications. And then things that are unique to Google Apps for Business and for Education on the support and reliability standpoint, we offer a 99.9% SLA as well as 24/7 phone support for any technical issues. And in particular for the Google Apps for EDU version, I think one of the most important things to point out is that it's absolutely, totally free for schools. So with that very high-level introduction, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Janine, and she can, again, walk us through some of the details of how they evaluated Google Apps from a security, privacy, and compliance standpoint. Janine, take it away.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everybody. I'm Janine Roeth, and I'm really happy to be part of the program and thank Google for inviting me to participate. What I'd like to start off with is really a quick orientation to the University of California. It's a system of 10 campuses, many with professional schools, and 5 medical centers. The UC campuses are really 1/2 of the top 10 in rankings of public research universities. Each of the campuses has an autonomy, but although all together contribute to UC's mission of teaching, research, and public service. I will note that of the Department of Energy labs, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which conducts unclassified research, has already gone Google. Looking at UC Santa Cruz is one of the 10 campuses, and I'll say it does have a stunning physical presence on the coast and in the redwoods, and it has close proximity to Silicon Valley and to San Francisco. The 5 academic divisions and the 10 residential colleges speak to UC Santa Cruz's distinction as a major research university, but one that has an uncommon commitment to undergraduate education. You'll see that our student enrollment is about 16,000, and when you start to add the faculty, staff, collaborators, and visitors, we look at a total population of about 22,000. So I'd like to go through why, at a very high level, why did we want to change our services and look at Google Apps? On the driver's side, you'll see the UC budget cuts, and I think California budget woes are well known. At UC Santa Cruz, as we were addressing our portion of cuts over the past 3 years, we were really looking to preserve investments in areas that were directly supporting the campus mission of teaching and research, as opposed to the more commodity services such as email or calendaring services. In terms of those services, we were also clearly lagging in our service offering, not just in email and calendar, but in also overall collaboration services. Our users didn't have a way, a uniform way at least, to share documents or to chat with each other. And finally, our proximity to Silicon Valley has been a plus, but it's also been a minus because we really have struggled with recruitment and retention of staff when there's such an exciting world that is just really very close by. You'll see that the benefits of our change really did directly connect to the drivers. The external services like Google, they definitely cost less than our campus service. As Adam mentioned, Google was free. And they also have a robust and expansive feature set and an ability that really lets us scale it to the entire community. And to be able to count on expert technical staffing outside of our organization was a huge, huge win for us as well. Finally, we also found that having the mobility with the mobile access and greatly improved user interfaces was something that was of value to our customers because it was really so much better than what we were able to offer through our campus services. I'd like to give a sense of the timeline of Google Apps deployment for UC campuses and labs because, as I said, even though UC Santa Cruz, it's one of the 10 campuses, we do operate as a system. I'll note that the students were the first deployments on the campuses, with UC Davis doing a full student rollout in 2008 after they did a pilot. It was also the year that we signed our first UC and Google agreement. UC Santa Cruz and UC Riverside both launched opt-in rollouts the next fall, and then early in 2010, Santa Cruz moved all of our students to Google. We called it slug mail, and Riverside followed suit in the fall. As well, early in 2010, a group of the UC security and policy officers worked together on an assessment framework for email services in conjunction with the campus councils and the CIOs. UC Santa Cruz took and evolved that framework and applied it as well in the middle of 2010, looking at multiple providers for email, calendar, and collaboration services. Also in 2010, that's when Lawrence Berkeley National Lab went Google. And that was really very critical because they have research constituents, and it started to give us that great view into how to handle some of the concerns of faculty and staff that are in a highly research environment. You can see that 2011 was the year that we updated the agreement, and that's what really enabled us to roll out to our faculty and staff in November. And here in early 2012, we merged our students into that domain. So they moved from slugmail into the ucsc.edu domain. And we think that we'll be able to more fully realize the collaboration that we look for between faculty, staff, and students. And then finally, you'll see that UC Berkeley also announced their intention to go to Google in 2012. I'd like to give you a sense of what we looked at as we were assessing Google. There were primarily 4 different areas, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit, but more in depth in the service levels, security, and privacy a little bit more in a minute. I do want to say that our students were giving Google really, really high marks, and they loved slugmail. But that wasn't really enough for us to go to provide the service to faculty and staff, because we knew that that touched on different concerns, and we knew that we needed to understand those areas as part of the decision-making process. So that's what you see reflected in these 4 areas, is we knew we had a foundation of great service that the students really loved, but we wanted to look at those areas that were specific to the faculty and staff. The first area of context, cost, features, and functions really was just a reinforcement of the gap between our own service offering and the options such as Google. The last one, vendor reputation, peer adoption, and transition, was really addressing some of the lack of trust that the faculty and staff had, not just for Google, but for any external service provider. The other thing that this reflects is that back in 2010, the number of very high research-ranked universities that had already gone Google for faculty and staff was very limited. For some of our faculty, it was important that we're able to compare UC to a similar research institution, such as a Brown or a University of Minnesota, rather than a state government or a community college, which, even though there's some of the same issues, there's still an important distinction for our community. I will say that this overall assessment was an institutional evaluation, and it was really intended to identify those risks that we needed to mitigate at an institutional level or might be an actual showstopper. It also ultimately informed that recommendation to go Google. Participating in the assessment was the CIO, the privacy officer, myself as the security officer, internal audit, human resources, and faculty representatives from the academic senate. And we reviewed the results with the campus executive management, with campus council, and with governance. Let's go a little bit more into some of the areas related to security and privacy. Before I go into each of the elements on this slide, I would like to review a list of the frequently asked questions and why they had particular meaning at UC Santa Cruz. I'll say these aren't specific to Google, and I'm sure that many are familiar to the folks listening to this session. One question that comes up, it came up early and it comes up often, is who owns the data? And in a research environment with intellectual property, this was a really important element, and it was important that the university retain ownership no matter where the data was stored. Another question that comes up a lot is, where is my data and who has access? In some instances, we found that this was just a simple question of, hey, can I ever get my data out? Is it open? Is the standards-based for me to get my email off of this system? And in other instances, it was more related to the interest that the university had to manage requests for information from third parties, legal requests, or even governments. And at the time of our assessment, examples such as the University of Wisconsin, who had a FOIA request, and some of the events between Google and China made it particularly visible. In our case, faculty have also come to expect a level of privacy based on our electronic communications policy, which in general does not allow monitoring or disclosure of communications without consent. So you can see where the question of where is my data, who has access, is really important to us. Another question that comes up is what kind of monitoring or scanning happens and why? You know, I think it's generally understood that there's some level of scanning and indexing that's needed to operate the service, to be able to do searches and so on. but the extent and for what purpose was really behind some of this question. And I think there was early on, and there still remains to some extent, a confusion between the consumer offering that has ads and the university offering, which absolutely does not. The other aspect to this question about monitoring or scanning is that some of our faculty work in areas that might be thought of as offensive or controversial. You know, examples come up about teaching of weapons of mass destruction or even research about competitors to Google like Microsoft. Would any provider be reviewing the content and objecting under the guise of an acceptable use policy because it's potentially controversial or otherwise considered unacceptable? And then in general, we had the questions about, is it secure? Is it private? Will it be available? And these are questions that come up about every provider and are asked with every breach or privacy issue or things that hit the main media. And as we also found out, sometimes those security and privacy expectations are a little bit unrealistically high as faculty and staff want assurance that services can be used to submit the most sensitive of information, even unencrypted, something that we know is not a good practice regardless of the security controls. So let's go through some of these areas. And while we looked at multiple providers in our assessment, I'm going to highlight some aspects that are specific to Google. Under the security policies and controls, this was a comparison of Google's policies and controls to our own. And overall, we see that Google commits to security standards and will commit to providing audit reports as well. Google met many of our minimum security requirements in the areas of password strength and encrypted data transmission, and they certainly exceeded our campus serviceability in other areas, especially those related to data centers where the infrastructure, application, and physical security is, and then spam and phishing and virus handling. Google has a lot of security white papers and published information online, and I have to say that our faculty and staff really appreciated this transparency when it came to questions about security. Regarding privacy, in terms of protection, Google contractually committed to protect the confidentiality of our data, and beyond this, we were looking at that question of who has access. We were able to review the extent of scanning and indexing the no ads and Google's administrative access to our data. We looked at existing statements about sharing and noted that the Google's privacy policy is outside of our agreements and subject to change, and in fact is undergoing change as we speak. Finally, we looked at privacy against our own electronic communications policy, which, as I mentioned, sets a pretty high bar for monitoring or disclosure, and we were pleased to see that we were able to remain in compliance with our own policy in that regard with looking at the Google service. With acceptable use policies, we compared the acceptable use policies themselves, Google's, other providers, and our own, and we did not find substantial conflicts. We also don't actively monitor for violations of our acceptable use policy, so it was important that Google not require us to do so. Google does retain a right to notice us if there's an end-user violation and ask that we resolve it, but to date, we're not aware of Google actually suspending any end users based on their interpretation of acceptable use policy violations. Although I will say we highlighted that as a potential risk if there were any interpretations that would differ. On to data ownership, migration, storage, et cetera, Google says in multiple places and in multiple ways that they do not own our data, that we do own our data. That's very, very important. Google APIs do allow for the transfer of ownership for docs, et cetera, from accounts, although we determined that we would need to set up local policies about how and when that would be done. We also noted that Google offered migration tools, and there's a site, dataliberation.org, that's very useful for those who want to regularly access or archive data. And if, unfortunately, there's a parting of ways, Google commits to returning or destroying customer data. As was the case with our campus service, how long users keep their emails is user determined. And in fact, we identified a risk in this area that users needed to be aware that deleted emails were immediately unrecoverable, which is different from campus services where we could actually retrieve from backups as a possibility. International storage was a concern, though what we noticed is that the security architecture of storage was helpful with regards from a security point of view, and jurisdiction in general was a mitigation on inappropriate access to data. And then related to that, for export control, as an open public university, most UC research activities should be excluded from export controls because we have an exception for fundamental research. But if it does exist, one of the points that we really understood was that it was not suitable for email or Google Apps. And this was identified as a risk simply because we needed to do user education and awareness, much along the lines of making users aware that putting extremely sensitive information, social security numbers, credit cards, and so on, is not a good idea to use in email. And that's not just with Google as well. In terms of availability and continuity, this was really a pretty straightforward assessment of history and looking at availability and uptime. Adam mentioned that Google has publishes their performance history and promises 99.9% uptime by an SLA. And again, I'll just say that the redundancy element here that really speaks to continuity and availability, that exceeded what we could do with our campus services, and so clearly the risk there was quite acceptable. In terms of incident and breach notification, this is where we focused in the assessment on how abuse and other incidents would be reported to UC Santa Cruz, and we really wanted to ensure that they could connect to how we responded to incidents. For breach notification, we also wanted to review Google's commitment to notify us in event of a breach because we really wanted UC Santa Cruz to be able to handle those according to our internal procedures. We didn't identify any risks that we needed to mitigate here. For third-party and legal requests, e-discovery, FERPA, this was an area that we wanted to review again to ensure that the university could handle and respond to those types of requests. This is important as the university goes through its own considerations for what to release. As a public institution, we're well used to receiving public requests or requests for public information in California, and we wanted to make sure that we could apply those same processes and from our institution to those types of requests that might come through Google. Google is very clear in assigning us that responsibility, and the only risk is the caveat that they have of to the extent required by law. We are happy to see that Google has things such as their transparency report to give us an opportunity to see what other types of requests they get and how they respond. We also reviewed when Google would be willing to help us with outside requests, or even those that might be related to internal investigations when our administrative access was not sufficient. This would be access to log information or other information that our administrative console may not have directly, but would require interactions with Google. For e-discovery, we reviewed if we could meet our obligations for e-discovery. And actually in this area, we found that the audit APIs were a great benefit to our existing process. Finally, for FERPA, our 2008 agreement was pretty limited in this area, but by 2010, a standard EDU agreement does reflect the school official designation, which is important to the university. In the area of identity management, provisioning, and authentication, we were looking at that ability to provision from our identity management system. And Adam mentioned that a strength of Google Apps was that sort of integration. We had actually already knew from our work with the student service, SlugMail, that we could use the provisioning APIs with few changes to policies and practices. We don't use single sign-on, I might add. In the audit capabilities, this is really looking at what it meant to have less visibility into the service operations, because we did anticipate moving as much of our infrastructure to Google as possible. Through a review of the requests that our technical team handled, and again looking at those tools and the APIs, we determined that the risks were not only acceptable, but that we actually had pretty rich access to information. And then finally, there's the catch-all category of additional risks. And that was one where we wanted to identify and look at any special populations. We already talked about export controls and the way that, while not directly applicable to much of the research in our environment, how we would handle the awareness there. Anything that was subject to HIPAA had already developed their business around applications and storage that did not rely on email or what would go into Google. So we knew HIPAA compliance was fine and was not required within the Google environment. We also determined that our police department security requirements were met with the current configurations and didn't require other mitigations or addressing within the Google contract. So, on to the assessment outcome. I mean, I know this hasn't been set up as a cliffhanger. We have gone Google, and so clearly Google Apps was acceptable, and in many cases we found it was favorable to our existing service. There was one primary next step, which was to update the agreement from the student agreement of 2008, and that was handled by strategic sourcing along with our Office of General Counsel. In the meantime, we took that time to take broad campus input, which was generally very positive, and we were able to answer questions and concerns. And I'll say that we drew a lot on the assessment material, especially in the areas of security and privacy, to answer those types of questions. So moving on to look a little bit at security, which we see is process and technologies, but there's also that piece of people, that contribute a lot to how security is managed in an organization. And education and awareness of people to really help build their understanding of security and to help guide their actions to the appropriate protection and disclosure of information is a pretty important part of our environment. So I'd like to share with you some of our approaches to education and awareness. The next slide shows, well, first of all, October, I think many will know that October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we certainly take advantage of that month to amplify the messages that we also try to deliver all year long. What you see in this word cloud is it's the actual grouping of all of our email, web, and poster information from the past years, where we've delivered the messages such as top 10 security best practices and email scam awareness and minimize stored personal identity information, know what's on your computer, be secure when working remotely and with mobile devices. These are the types of messages that are common to security awareness campaigns in general, including the one that Google's recently announced, such as the one that they call Good to Know, which I would encourage everyone to check out. I'd like to focus on October of 2011, which, knowing that we were going Google shortly thereafter, we decided to focus on Google itself. And there were three main messages that we highlighted as part of this effort. The first one was really looking at all those enhanced security features that Google offered. The fact that there's better spam and virus filtering, there's certain tools such as the ability to check for suspicious activity on your account, and then the two-step verification for those who wanted added account security. I use that myself. Another thing is that we had early identified that fact that Google was going to be great for mobile devices, and people were absolutely going to be using it on mobile devices. So we used that as an opportunity to remind and point people to the security requirements and best practices regarding mobile devices. Finally, we wanted to remind the community that good security practices always apply. It's the fundamentals. They don't change. No matter how great the security is, no matter what kinds of audits there are, certifications there are, email still isn't inherently private or secure. I've already mentioned don't send sensitive information in email. Use encryption. Secure delete when you're done. These are the types of messages that we provide over and over again, and this was no exception. When we look ahead for security and privacy, we still have some questions, and we're looking forward to finding out how these things unfold as we get more into using Google Apps. When we look at things in practice, when it comes to e-discovery and legal requests and the AUP, we're wondering how will it work? So we do know that we have less visibility into service operation, even though the technical staff has found themselves very pleased with the administrative controls. We've already had interactions with Google for operational issues, though not on some of the more specific security or information requests areas. Will Google ever interpret the AUP differently? We don't know. We have used the audit APIs, and we found those to be very useful. I've already mentioned that. And we also are looking forward to using those APIs for deprovisioning and migration. I mentioned earlier that we look to do the policies locally and use the tools for reassignment of documents and so on. For education and awareness, there is no reason to stop doing education and awareness. We intend to keep very active in both the security and privacy areas, and we see an opportunity with Google to actually amplify and make more known some of the tools that they offer. In the privacy area, there's the dashboard, there's the transparency report. We note that there's ways for people to look at spam management to see account activity. We'll continue with our messages about good passwords and looking out for phishing or other scams. We'll promote two-step verification, especially when it comes to things like elevated privileges. We have a lot of users that use local email clients. Well, one of the things that we would like to do is to promote the use of the web so that we can reduce what's stored on the desktops and really lessen what kind of risk we see and increase the continuity of services if there's a theft or a failure or a loss. And the last part of what's ahead is the inevitable expansion of the services. UC Santa Cruz, our focus has really been on email and calendar because that's the data that we were migrating from current email and calendar services. But you know, it's pretty clear to us that people are moving very quickly past that to Google Docs and to other areas for collaboration. And from a security or privacy perspective, we're really looking for those tools that will help us with visibility about the sharing of information, sharing of docs, and looking at leakage that might occur in those areas. I know some of the campuses are ahead of us in using CloudLock, for example, and we look forward to learning from the experiences of those other institutions. We also have not enabled other applications beyond the core suite, and we note that there may be some security or privacy considerations in the terms of services or the policies there. We know that the recent unifying of the privacy policy is making that somewhat simpler, but I think we'll need to do some review of the implications when it comes to going to the consumer apps, as we'll need to do with other features or service levels or other policy updates. We'll want to communicate with the campus, what are the implications? Because actually, this is where it tends to bring up those same questions. Who has access to my data? Is it secure? Is it still private types of things? And then lastly, just in the area of expanding services, we note that there's some definite opportunities in mobile device management, and we know that people are bringing their own device and look forward to the ways that we can offer services to users as we see more and more of those devices. And I'm sure there's a lot more ahead, and I am always thankful to those that are ahead of us that we can learn from, and we are certainly happy to do the same for those behind. And so with that, I want to say thank you once again to Google for having me participate, and I will now turn this back to Adam.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janine, for that really in-depth look at how UCSC evaluated Google Apps from a security, privacy, and compliance standpoint. And Janine, I know you have to run off to another meeting, so feel free to drop off if you want to. I'll take it from here. And again, really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So if everyone could bear with me for one moment here while I switch over to the other presentation. There we go. And kind of pick up where we left off from there. So one of the things that we often get asked is your data safe in the cloud, and in particular in Google's cloud? And so what we wanted to do with this presentation is give you enough information so that you could in fact decide for yourself. One of the ways that we sometimes look at this question is, well, is your data safe in the current environment, in your on-premise environment? And there are a lot of challenges. For those of you that are in the security space today, you know what these are and you're quite familiar with them. One of them is that Users want to be able to use their data whenever and wherever they are, typically on various types of devices. And what this often does is cause them to take the data outside of our standard sets of devices and put it on things like thumb drives and laptops. And when that happens, that is an increase in the risk to your business or your organization in terms of that device getting lost, right? A lot of the really big data breaches that you read about are because someone left a laptop that was unencrypted in the back of a taxi cab, or it got stolen out of their car, out of their house, or what have you. And using data in the traditional fashion often leads to these scenarios. Another problem that many of you are probably familiar with is the problem of patching your systems. In a traditional on-premise legacy environment, you've got multiple operating systems, multiple applications, multiple versions of those things, and the whole thing quickly becomes a multiplicative matrix that really challenges organizations to stay on top of it. Now, I talk to many businesses that claim that they've really established a core competency and an excellence in obtaining, testing, and deploying patches, especially the really serious security patches, very, very quickly. And I think that that's good, and I think that it was done in a situation, a scenario where there really was no choice but to do so. But I think when you look at cloud computing, and in particular when you look at Google Apps, there is a choice now. And if you take a step back and say, well, if we had a choice of investing all that time and all those resources in building that core competency to deploy patches, would we do so? And of course, for most people, the answer is no. And here are some bullet points about why the patching piece is such an issue. And again, many of you are probably familiar with these. So how do we secure the data at Google that's stored in Google Apps? So first of all, from a physical security standpoint, we build data centers that are structured for reliability, structured for sustainability, and structured for security and data protection. And the images that are shown on this slide come from a video that we produced that shows all of the security and data protections that are in place in our data centers. And so I highly encourage you to go out and take a look at that. It is available on YouTube. If you just do a Google Data Center Security Tour, you'll be able to access that. It's also available on our Google Apps Security and Privacy webpage. And you can reach it through google.com/apps/trust. And you'll have access to a number of resources, including the video that's shown with a couple of these images. One of the highlights of that video, by the way, is the drive shredder, which you see there on the lower side, the lower left image. It's actually kind of like a paper shredder, but for computer hard drives to ensure that none of the data that might be on a hard drive that's being retired out of rotation could ever be read and accessed by an individual. But I don't want to steal the thunder or create a spoiler, so go ahead and take a look at that video. So inside the data centers, we actually are developing our own hardware and our own software. From a hardware standpoint, we build many, many thousands of servers out of commodity components, so basically very low-cost components that allow us to very rapidly assemble and build out and scale our data centers to support our growth and support all of our different applications, including Google.com, including the Google Apps, including YouTube, including everything. On the software side, we've developed a custom operating system built on the Linux software stack that's been specifically hardened in a number of different areas. And so between our custom hardware and our custom software, we really do have a reduced security threat surface area, if you will. There's fewer vulnerabilities because there's less code that's been written, and we don't have any unnecessary code or unnecessary hardware in our infrastructure. So, for example, there's no video hardware or video drivers on any of our servers because they don't have monitors connected to them. Similarly, there's no peripheral ports or peripheral drivers. And each one of these areas represents an area in traditional IT infrastructure that could bring vulnerabilities with it. So our system really allows us to reduce the number of potential vulnerabilities that we're subject to. Now, should we encounter a situation where we need to deploy a patch, because we have a very, very homogeneous environment, we can rapidly deploy that patch across all of our data centers and applications. And of course, all of that takes place completely seamlessly to our customers. We have what's called a multi-tenant distributed environment, which means that all of our data is stored in our storage mechanism. Our storage mechanism is known as the Google File System, or GFS. We've done some research on that, and so if you search for Google File System, you'll see some academic papers that we've published on it. And basically, it's an infrastructure that was designed initially to support the massive scalability requirements of our Google.com search index. And it's grown over time and obviously is capable of supporting all of the applications that sit on top of our infrastructure. All of the data is stored inside this Google file system, including our consumers' data, consumer users' data, I should say, our enterprise customer data, our own corporate data. So millions upon millions of users are all using this infrastructure that has proven over the years to be incredibly reliable, incredibly scalable, and of course, offer significant data protections to our users. This is an infrastructure that has spawned multiple other open source multiple open source storage layers such as Hadoop and others. Now let's talk about some of the concerns that typically come up and how Google addresses them. We'll look at external attacks, internal threats, privacy, reliability, and what you need as an exit strategy as you're considering us as well as other cloud providers. So from an external attack perspective, we deploy a multiple layer defense in-depth strategy when it comes to network security. We have a very tight control of the size and the makeup of the network perimeter. We are able to only allow authorized services and protocols to transit across that network, and we manage and we route and we monitor all that traffic to ensure that it is authorized, as well as to collect information at specific data points about whether or not those packets might look suspicious. And if we do detect packets that are unauthorized or otherwise suspicious, we have the ability to just drop those packets and eliminate them from our network. And of course, access to the network devices themselves is limited only to authorized administrative personnel. We have a very robust incident response capability that is patterned after the NIST standard. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, I believe. They have defined a set of standards around how to respond to incidents. Ours, of course, is based on that, but extended in certain ways that are unique to what we do here at Google. But obviously, we're monitoring the networks all the time. We have a 24/7 global security team that is available throughout the world, so that wherever it's sort of the business day in the world, we have a network security center that's live and people actively monitoring the network out of there. From a incident response standpoint, in our process, we have defined incident coordinators, we have defined remediation and defined notification requirements and procedures. We also have the ability to monitor our binaries that are running in our systems, and should we detect a binary that has been somehow affected in some way, whether it's an attempt to compromise and attack that binary, or whether it's an inadvertent change in the binary itself, we can immediately isolate that machine and those binaries from affecting any others that are in our network. So a very sophisticated proprietary change control mechanism that is part of our incident response. Looking a little bit at internal threats and concerns. So we have a security team at Google that is comprised of some of the leading experts in information, application, and network security. It numbers over 250 people full-time now just dedicated to information security. And we have the benefit of drawing people from all these different aspects of life, academic, corporate, and others, to pull together a very talented and impressive team. They're often leading researchers in their fields. We publish lots of academic research. We also open source many of the tools that we've developed so that others can take advantage of some of our security experience and expertise. Now, our security team conducts secure design reviews and code audits. We also have internal audit and compliance teams. They actually not included in that 250 number that I talked about before. And they have liaisons with other parts of our organization as well. From access to the data standpoint, we are very focused on role-based access with a least privilege and need-to-know basis only. The list of who has access to our production systems is very, very limited. It's rigorously maintained and requires VP-level approval for any changes, any additions to that list. We obviously have automatic procedures whenever anyone moves into a different role or leaves Google. We have very rich logging and monitoring of all admin changes to the system. So anytime an admin may be logged in and may be doing anything, there are audit logs that are tracking everything that they do. We have an internal identity management system which virtually guarantees that we know who's associated with which ID, and together with those logs, we have a very, very tight control internally on what our employees are able to do. Wherever appropriate, we execute background checks on any of the employees that would potentially be accessing any customer data. And on a regular basis, we review the access levels that those employees may have. Security has been integrated directly into our software development process. There are very rigorous code development reviews and cycles that we go through. The security team themselves provides essentially a vetted set of core components for doing common things like authentication and authorization, reading and writing from logs, dealing with cryptography, etc. Our information security team is also responsible for defining the curriculum and overseeing the education that all engineers, and not just engineers, but all employees at Google receive regarding information security and data protection. Let's talk a little bit about privacy. Janine covered this really, really well in her portion when she talked about how UCSC looked at privacy and the ownership of the data. So very, very simply put, your vendor, your cloud vendor, should not own your data. And in our case, Google does not own your data. We're very clear about this. We are what is called a processor of your data. You own your data and remain the controller of that data. You can delete that data or remove it at any time from our systems. And for more details on exactly how that process works, you can take a look at our privacy policy at google.com/privacy. As Janine talked about, there are scanning and indexing procedures that run, and they do things like block spam, and they help you search your email and things like that. They are 100% automated. They involve no human interaction. And they really are focused on making the services better for you as a user. The only situation where you see scanning used for ads serving is when you're using the free consumer version of Gmail, for example. But if you're using Google Apps for your business or Google Apps for education, the ads have been disabled and there is no ad-related scanning that's going on in those scenarios. So we're very, very clear about the fact that we do not share your content or personal information with third parties. And you should absolutely take a look at our privacy policy located at google.com/privacy. You may be aware that we've made some changes in order to consolidate what was previously multiple different privacy policies down to one. And it's very important that our users get full visibility into how we protect their data, how we use their data, and how we keep it private. So again, we do not share it with third parties. We also provide transparency into other aspects of privacy, such as government requests for data. And Janine alluded to this as well, but I encourage you all to go out and take a look at google.com/transparency report, and you can see where we have disclosed the requests for data that we've received from different governments across the world. To my knowledge, we are the only cloud vendor to offer this level of transparency into these sets of requests. Now, if you don't know what to expect, you may go out there and be surprised to see that some governments have made many thousands of requests of Google for data. The thing to keep in mind when you look at this is the vast majority of those requests are typically for consumer Gmail account data where they believe there is some criminal activity associated with it, or where it is a request to remove YouTube content that is inappropriate or against the acceptable use policy. So have a look, take a look at what you see out there, and then kind of put the same measurement stick up against the other cloud vendors that are offering similar services and see what they're doing in this space. And then finally, from a privacy perspective, externally as it relates to the European Union, we are Safe Harbor certified. And if you go out to export.gov/safeharbor, you can see our certification listed there. That allows us to effectively transfer personal information from the EU to the US. Obviously, it's nice to hear me talk about how we protect your data, but sometimes it's nice to get a little bit more information. And specifically as it relates to government requests for data, this slide shows an analysis done by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, one of the leading privacy watchdogs here in the States, rating each of the major vendors on how they protect their users' data, particularly from government requests. And you can see there that Google finishes quite favorably with essentially a total of 3 stars, indicating that we are being transparent about data demands and government requests, and that we fight for our users' privacy in the courts as well as in Congress to try to ensure that the laws and the regulations that are put forth by Congress are consistent with protecting the privacy of our users. So again, if you go out and search for Electronic Frontier Foundation and look for this study, when the government comes knocking, who has your back, you'll be able to see the reports for the results for yourself. Let's talk about reliability a little bit. I mentioned before how our file system has been built for reliability and scalability, but in fact all of our applications have been built that way. Of course, Google.com is one of our services, and that has a tremendously high service availability rate. On the Google Apps side, built on top of that same infrastructure, we're able to offer a 99.9% SLA for both Google Apps for Business as well as Google Apps for Education and for Government. And in fact, in 2010, we significantly exceeded that SLA level with Gmail availability up at 99.984%. Now, that's a pretty good number, but when you add in the fact that we have 0 scheduled maintenance, it's pretty significant. Most SLA calculations, especially the internal ones for existing IT infrastructure, kind of have a little bit of an out where they say, 2 hours every week, the system's down for maintenance, and that doesn't count against our SLA. That's not the case with Google Apps. We have 0 scheduled maintenance. When you take our uptime numbers for 2010 and compare that to average uptime numbers for traditional on-premise email servers, you'll see that Google Apps is 32 times more reliable than your average on-premise email server and 46 times more reliable than Microsoft Exchange. So there's tremendous reliability benefits that you get from moving to Google Apps and using Gmail as your main email platform. Let's talk a little bit about exit strategy. We firmly believe that we're building products that people use because they get great value out of them and, frankly, because they love to use them. If for any reason our users don't like our products, we want to give them the ability to take their data out, to remove it from our systems, and to have it be portable to then be loaded into whatever system or archive they want to store the data in. We have an entire engineering team dedicated to that. They're known as the Data Liberation Organization, and you can see information about getting data out of any of our applications at that website listed there, dataliberation.org. And this is true both for our business users and for our consumer users. So really encourage you to take a look at that and then again evaluate what we offer and make visible to what you see being made available from other vendors, particularly other vendors of cloud solutions. So one thing that I think is common across all of Google Apps is this constant stream of innovation, right? If you look back the last year or so, we've rolled out really, really significant new features and functionalities in Google Apps. And that stream of innovation also applies to what we do on the security front. And so here's a couple of highlights over the last few years. One of the things we did way back in 2008 was say, hey, you can view attachments directly in the browser. So for example, PDF files, or Microsoft spreadsheets or document files. Avoiding the need to have the client code in order to view those files on your PC allows you to avoid potential risk. The fact of the matter is, unfortunately, many vulnerabilities are discovered and exploited in some of those client applications, and being able to avoid running them and just being able to view the attachment in the browser is a pretty significant improvement in security for our end users. We defaulted all of our connections to use the HTTPS so that all the data traveling back and forth between your computer and our applications in our data centers is encrypted. We started to really try to focus on password strength in 2009 and offered things like a password strength meter that provided feedback on how strong a given password was. And I'll talk more about what we've done in that front, I think, on the next slide. TLS encryption in the email. This is something that we added as a result of the acquisition of Postini. This encrypts the email channel on which the message will be transited and allows us to do it in a way that is enforced by a policy and kind of prevents the connection from toggling back to a clear text connection when a TLS connection cannot be established. We started to really roll out significant capabilities on mobile device management in early 2010, and that's continued. We've had, I'm going to say, 4 to 6 major releases between 2010 and now that really have enhanced our ability to manage a disparate set of mobile devices all within the Google Apps control panel. So obviously Android is very tightly integrated, no surprise there, but iPhone, BlackBerry, Windows Mobile, all are supported platforms with varying degrees of manageability through our mobile device management capabilities. Again, in 2010, we achieved a FISMA certification, which applies to the Google Apps for Government edition. And one thing to note there is that a lot of the infrastructure that underlies Google Apps for Government is the same infrastructure that underlies Google Apps for Business and for Education. Not all of it, certainly, but some of it. And the FISMA certification also has a very nice mapping to ISO 27001, which is another third-party security standard. And so these are all third-party attestations that Google's security is of a particularly high caliber. So I said I would talk more about password and authentication stuff. About 18 months ago, we really looked at what was going on and said, you know, one of the most important things that we can do to help our users be more secure is strengthen the authentication mechanisms. And so what we did was we built our own two-factor authentication capability. It's called TwoStep Verification, and it is available for free with Google Apps. And the way it works is when you log in, you use both your username and your password, and at that time you get a second factor of authentication known as an authentication code that is either generated by an application on your smartphone or sent to you via SMS text message. So we support Android, iPhone, BlackBerry on the smartphone applications. And then you can also, as I said, pretty much any phone these days can get an SMS text message. And if that doesn't work for you, we can actually have an automated phone call give you the second factor. So it's really easy to set up, it's really easy to manage and use, and it's free. It's built directly into Google Apps. And by the way, if you are a Google Apps consumer user, you have a personal Gmail account, this is also free and available to you. I highly encourage you to go out and set that up on your account. It really virtually eliminates the risk associated with your account getting hacked by someone either phishing or snooping or otherwise getting their hands on your password, because they still can't get in if they don't have the second factor code. So just to kind of wrap it up on this side, I mean, obviously on-premise technology is here to stay, but cloud is also here to stay. And the value proposition and the economic and collaborative benefits are so strong that we're obviously seeing many, many organizations, both in the higher education space, as Janine showed, as well as in the private sector and in the government sector, moving to the cloud. And we really need to change our mindset around security and compliance and privacy. If you're an IT professional, the controls and the visibility that you're going to have are going to be different in the cloud. It's going to be very important for you to understand what those differences are, what kinds of tools, visibility, and capabilities you will have in those areas, and where you're going to have to rely on a vendor such as Google to provide some of that assurance for you. There's really exciting innovation going on in the cloud, and of course that's true both at the product and productivity and collaborative standpoint, but also on the security standpoint. And we like to say that the cloud can be in many areas as secure, if not more secure, than what a typical business or educational institution or government agency is able to do on their own. And with that, I'd like to wrap up today's presentation. Again, for more information, particularly around the security, privacy, and compliance areas, I encourage you to go to www.google.com/apps/trust. Thank you very much for spending the last hour of your day with us. Again, my name is Adam Swidler. I'm a senior manager here at Google, and I encourage you to reach out through our website, let us know what your questions are, and see if you can get the information that you need, and encourage you to try, evaluate, and go Google, as we say, by deploying Google Apps for your organization. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.